All right, hello everybody. My name is Rob Capra. I'm an associate professor here at SILS. I'm excited to get to talk to you guys all today. And I'm going to kind of introduce myself and then talk a little bit about my research. So one of the things I always like to do when I meet a new person is I like to find out a little bit about where they're from and what they've done. So I'll tell you that about myself. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, which is over in the western part of the state. I went to school at Washington University in St. Louis. I did my undergraduate and my master's degree in computer science there. So I am a person coming at information science from very much to the computer science perspective. After I did my master's, I worked in industry for a number of years, and this was back, if you remember when AT&T was split up into what they called baby bells. So I worked for one of the baby bells in their research labs. And the one that I was at was at Southwestern Bell. We were located in sort of the Midwestern part of the US. And then I got transferred down to Austin, Texas for a while. So I lived in Texas, which was cool. When I was there working in Southwestern Bell's research lab, this was in the mid 90s. And this was before Siri and Alexa and all that kind of stuff. But I worked in a group that was focused on voice user interface design and voice interaction for telephone services. And back in the 90s, this was like brand new stuff. Nobody knew how it was going to work out. And we were doing some kind of pioneering stuff back then that was really cool with voice activated dialing and voice response systems that could respond to your voice and so on. That's kind of where I got introduced to the idea of human-computer interaction, that there was this really interesting field that studies how people and computers work or interact, and how people can, how we can make computers easier to interact with. And so I then went back to school and did my PhD at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia, just up the road here. And I focused on human-computer interaction there. And a lot of my work there was looking at sort of how we could make things on the web easier for people to find and re-find. And that led me down a road of being interested in information science and how people interact with information systems. And so a lot of my teaching and research focus here at SILS deals with that combination of sort of the HCI part and how people interact with information systems and search systems. I always like to include a few fun things in my introduction. So I'm going to tell you guys a few of my hobbies. I love to play board games, things like Settlers of Catan and Caverna and Terra Mystica, if any of you guys know those games. I used to have a gaming group that met once a month, and we played a really cool cooperative game called Pandemic. We don't play that game anymore. It's too depressing. But my niece visited this summer and got us hooked on Animal Crossing. So my wife and I have been playing Animal Crossing. I also enjoy making chocolates, and I look forward to the day when we can all be face to face and I can share some of my chocolate creations with everybody again. And since the pandemic, the chocolate making also turned into bread baking and muffin making and pastry making. So the pandemic has not been good for my waistline. Let me talk a little bit about the teaching research that I do here at SILS. So in the fall semesters, I usually teach a class that's our intro to database class. So I get to see a lot of students there. I love teaching that class. It's a great way to start thinking about how to organize information and access it. I also teach a class on usability evaluation. So usability evaluation deals with how do we assess an interface, a user interface? How do we know if it's usable by people? How do we measure usability? How do we tell if one interface is somehow more or less usable than another one? How can we get information from people that are using the interface to try to help improve it? In the spring semesters, I usually teach an intermediate data analysis course in Python that looks at many aspects of how to do both textual and numeric-based data analysis. I also teach every other year or so an HCI seminar on human-computer interaction, where we read current articles in the field and also read some of the foundation articles in the field. And so I guess I'll move on now and talk a little bit about the research work that I do. So I am really interested in how we can help people to search for information when they have a complex task. So if you think about systems like Google are really good, and they provide really great support when you need to find a fact or a simple thing that you just want to look up. If you have a very directed information need, you can go onto Google and probably find what you're looking for. But Google and those kinds of systems don't really provide a lot of support when you're engaged in a more complex task. Now, what do I mean by that? Complex task could be something that you know is going to stretch across multiple sessions. Maybe you were just diagnosed with some new health condition and you need to research it and understand more about it. Well, you know that you're going to go through a process of learning about that. Or maybe you're trying to fix your dishwasher, and you know that it's going to take several searches and several iterations to look through and find all that information. So those are the kinds of tasks that I'm interested in providing search support for. In particular, our research group has been looking at how we can provide tools in the search interface that can support searchers. I'll give you a couple examples of what we've been doing in that area. So one tool we did showed searchers the paths that other searchers had followed when they did similar searches. So the idea there was that if you could see if I had searched for this yesterday and now you were searching on this topic today, if you could see the path or the trail that I followed, would that help you in your search? And we found that there's some costs and benefits to that, so that people did find that seeing those trails were very helpful. But it also requires some cognitive load to understand what the trail of the other person was. So that was a really interesting result we found from that research. We've also been exploring how different types of information might be useful in the context of different search tasks. So here we did a project where we looked at classifying information into facts, concepts, opinions, and insights. And so if you were doing a search task and you had the ability to filter information by facts, concepts, opinions, and insights, would that be helpful to you? And we looked at this in the context of different levels of complexity of task. So we used Bloom's taxonomy here, which has now been updated to Anderson and Krathwohl's taxonomy of learning, to look at tasks across remember, understand, analyze, and create levels. And in a general sense, we found that the simpler tasks involved more facts and concepts, and that more complex tasks involved more of the insights and also general use across all the information types. So if it's a complex task, maybe you need more of the advice from other people. We've also been looking at some structured tools for helping you to understand what you're finding when you do a search. We have a tool called the Matrix tool that helps people doing comparative tasks. So it has sort of the items that you want to compare and the dimensions along which you want to compare those items, and helps you to do that as you search. We've got another tool that we call the org box tool that helps you to organize information you're finding into groups, and it helps you to sort of cognitively group information into pieces. And then we've got a final tool that helps you in just saving information into kind of an outline form, so that you can drag and drop things and structure it that way. And we've been doing some really fun studies with that. I've got a couple other projects out there that I'll just briefly mention. We've got some students that have been looking at how people learn when they're searching. So how does learning happen when you're searching? We've been doing some work looking at how search systems might or might not do a good job of supporting people in creative tasks. And then finally, I've got a student who's been doing some work in how to display search results in AR, VR environments. So if you're thinking about a head-mounted display and you're engaged in search, how do you display search results in those kinds of environments? So that gives you a little flavor of the kind of things that we do in our research lab, and I'm happy to talk to any of you guys. Feel free to contact me. Thanks.